Hey people, it's Nias talking. Now, I've chosen to do this video because it ties into a lot of the debates that are being had both online and in the real world with the talks about reparations and stuff like that. So let's get to it. So this is from Time magazine, how a court answered a forgotten question of slavery's legacy. In recent weeks, as Americans across the country have engaged in debates about how the Civil War period is publicly commemorated, a quieter battle over a related question was finally put to rest. On August 30th, 2017, senior United States District Judge Thomas F. Hogan answered an old question for Cherokee freedmen, the descendants of people who were enslaved by members of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma who had been fighting for their tribal citizenship since the early 1980s. The case of the Cherokee Nation v. Nash et al., Judge Hogan looked at whether an 1866 treaty which stated that people who had been emancipated by the Cherokee would, along with their descendants, have all the rights of native Cherokees, ensuring continued citizenship rights for the people whose ancestors were freedmen included on the Dole's Roll, the U.S. government's official list of tribal citizens between 1898 and 1914. Now, I'll just say with that, the Dole's Roll is very important because a lot of people say, well, we look at all these Indians, they don't look like Native Americans. That was a large part of it. A lot of white people paid $5 to the officials who were supposed to register people. So now you have people who are officially registered, and even to this day are claiming citizenship benefits that they are not entitled to. But many actual Native Americans and many black people who were part of the tribes or were enslaved by the tribe, who were entitled to those things, were locked out. So that was also a part of that. And I'll leave a link to about that in the description so you can have a read about that. In the case, the Cherokee Nation had held that the revised constitution, which expelled the freedmen from the tribe in 1983 on the premise that they were not blood Cherokee, though many of them are of black Cherokee ancestry, held more legal weight than the 1866 treaty. However, the judge ruled that the Constitution does not negate the freedmen's treaty rights granted to their forebears at the end of the Civil War. In other words, Cherokee freedmen are Cherokee. While the case of the Cherokee freedmen has continually made headlines during the past decade, the story of the American Indians as enslaved people and slave owners remained a relatively unknown aspect of American history. Let me just go back to that. Do you understand that they just said the Cherokee Nation in 1983 it tried to expel American Indians, black Cherokees, even those ones who were part of the tribe since 1866. Do you see how racist that is? Even though they didn't try and get rid of the white fake members, the real ones who were pretending, but they made sure to get rid of the black ones who were legitimately entitled to that. I want you to understand just how racist they are. It's not even about the money, it's about making sure a certain group of people don't get what they're entitled to. Slavery was a reality of indigenous life in the Americas prior to the arrival of Africans and Europeans. As Christina Snyder explains in her book Slavery in Indian Country, The Changing Face of Captivity in Early America, captivity was widespread and it took many forms, but as Snyder explains in tracing the history of southern Indian captivity to the pre-Columbian era, the advent of European colonialism meant that Indians found themselves thrust into a global economy underscored by a racialized system of human trafficking for profit. Slavery was not peculiar to indigenous societies where captives or prisoners of war obtained from enemy tribes, Snyder notes, but the commodified form that slavery took in the antebellum South and elsewhere in the colonial Americas was new. While the introduction of a rigid slave system to North America, which exploited both Indian and African bodies as a human commodity, indigenous people became part of that economy on both sides of the transaction. For example, in his book, The Westo Indian Slave Traders of the Early Colonial South, Erin E. Brown describes how the Westo Indians from the Northeast captured enemy tribes to trade to the English Virginians for guns, ammunition, metal tools, and other goods. In the West, as highlighted by the scholar Andre Resendez in his book The Other Slavery, the buying and selling of Indians, even though it was illegal and California entered the Union as a free state, was common practice in the years after the Mexican-American War. While the myth that African slavery replaced Indian slavery continues to persist in our society, Indian slavery never went away, contends Resendez, but rather coexisted with African slavery from the 16th all the way through to the late 19th century. The five tribes whose original homeland was located in the southern interior in an area bounded by the Cumberland River to the north and the Mississippi Valley to the west, and who included the Cherokee, adopted racialized chattel slavery in the 18th century. Southern whites urged them to participate in the enslaving of black people as part of the federal government's Indian civilization effort, hence the name Five Civilized Tribes. The Cherokee Nation exceeded their counterparts in embracing white southern slave culture and profited the most from slave ownership, You see, they just picked up the mentality. We've got to make sure they don't get anything. By 1809, there were 600 enslaved blacks living in the Cherokee Nation. By 1835, the numbers increased to 1,600. In her book, The House on Diamond Hill, a Cherokee plantation story, Taya Miles tells the intriguing story of the Chief Fan House, located on a vast plantation in northeast Georgia. It was named Diamond Hill in 1801 by its owner, James Van, the wealthiest and reportedly cruelest of Cherokee slave owners who had owned at least 100 slaves. Diamond Hill later fell into disarray as a consequence of Andrew Jackson's forced Indian removal, but the Van family continued to prosper as slavery in the Indian Territory, now the state of Oklahoma, proved far more profitable to the tribes than it had been in the Southeast. By 1860, there were 4,000 enslaved blacks living in the Cherokee Nation alone. Although the Cherokee Nation resolved to remain neutral at the outset of the Civil War in April 1861, by October they entered into a treaty to join the Confederate cause. The reason they argued in the document was that the Cherokee people had its origin in the South, its institutions were similar to those of the Southern states, and their interests identical with theirs. In addition, they painted the war as one of Northern cupidity and fanaticism against the institution of African servitude, against the commercial freedom of the South, and against the political freedom of the states. But by the following fall, the nation sorely divided as thousands of Cherokee fled to the Union lines. The Cherokee Council obligated its treaty alliance with the Confederacy on February 19, 1863, shortly after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. The Cherokee Nation issued an act providing for the abolition of slavery in the Cherokee Nation, which called for the immediate emancipation of all slaves in the Cherokee Nation. In a treaty ratified on July 27, 1866, the Cherokee Nation declared that those freedmen and their descendants shall have all the rights of native Cherokees. It is the words of these freedmen held on to during the long legal battle. Marilyn Van, a descendant of the James Van family, one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, expressed the idea to the NPR after the decision was issued. All we ever wanted, she said, was the rights promised us. So I want to start talking about the wider issues. Like, we've been hearing more about reparations nowadays, and if you saw that clip of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez talking about, I think it was posted on the Black Authority's Twitter, which some of you may have seen, but where she says, I have Native American blood, and I have African blood, and I have Spanish colonizer blood, but that doesn't make me native, that doesn't make me black. And the logical question is, if she isn't one of those two, either of the two, which one is she? She identifies with the white Spanish colonizer. So she's telling you very clearly what she thinks of herself. And then she's been trying to lump herself and the Hispanics into getting the reparations, because many of them were, at some point in the past, black, even though people like her who will acknowledge their black ancestry but say we're not black at the same time, trying to have it both ways. And the Mexicans, because of them losing the 1846 war, I think it was, or 1848, and their territory to the United States, and they've had 150 years to get their compensation back, and they had a whole country behind them to get it. If they didn't think it was worth it, it's not up to black people's reparations to be divvied up over to them. And notice how she doesn't go and talk about the Spanish giving reparations to the Puerto Ricans or the Mexicans. I mean, they owned those countries for 3 or 4 centuries, wasn't it? Well, at least 3 centuries. And they were absolute savages. I mean, when they went to the island of Hispaniola, they were so savage to many of the natives that they killed hundreds of thousands of them through overwork. That's why African slaves had to be brought over, because they just worked them to death. I mean, that's how savage they were. I mean, they took, I think it was the chief Hatui, and they were going to burn him alive, and they asked him to convert. And if I convert, will I go to heaven, and will Spaniards be there? Well, then I'd rather just go to hell rather than be with such cruel people. That's how evil they were. But they are not going to go to the Spaniards and ask them for any reparations, because they know what the response will be. Because they'll sooner try and reinvade South America and take it back than give them any reparations. but they think they have a chance of getting some goodies by piggybacking off black people. And that's not acceptable, and they need to, as a lot of people have been saying, hold their own nuts. Especially as we've seen, well, I personally have not seen this myself, but I've talked to a lot of people and they've told me the same thing over and over. This anti-black racism that comes from these Hispanics, the Cubans, the Puerto Ricans, the Dominicans, even people who look black or have black ancestry will work against the interests of black Americans, yet now something is on the horizon and they think they can get it. No, that's not acceptable. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'm going to leave an interview of Claude Anderson where we talk for 40 minutes and there's a lot more information there. Well, at least hopefully, I haven't seen it myself, but Claude Anderson is very good. So please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. If you want to support my GoFundMe, I'll leave it there, and I'll leave my Instagram there and all the sources so you can have a look. Peace, family.